I expect we'll see robust bipartisan support for these bills in today's House vote. Mr. President, this three-bill package advances some important priorities. It funds programs that support law enforcement and promote public safety in communities across America. It invests in critical infrastructure projects. And it supports efforts to unleash American energy to provide a reliable and affordable energy supply to the American people. And Mr. President, there's one more thing about this package that's significant. It spends less money than a continuing resolution. That's right. This bill spends less taxpayer money than if we passed another CR or continuing resolution to fund these agencies. And that's not an accident. That's what we can accomplish when we make appropriations a priority, when we put in the work, make tough choices, and put it up for a vote. Mr. President, appropriations is one of our core responsibilities, but it hasn't always been treated like the priority that it is. In too many cases in the past, massive omnibus bills were being written behind closed doors. That is not how I want to do things. When I became Majority Leader, I made it clear that I wanted appropriations to get the attention that it deserves. And we've made some solid progress on that front in this Congress. We've considered appropriations bills through regular order and passed 3 Senate appropriations bills before the August work period, something that hadn't been done going back to 2018. We should, Mr. President, be considering bills through regular order, a process that allows all senators an opportunity to make their voice and the voices of their constituents heard. It's not just a better process, it creates a better product, too. Mr. President, when we receive this next package from the House, there's no reason that we can't take it up and pass it quickly here in the Senate. As I said, this bill was written with input from both parties and from both the House and the Senate. It has the backing of the Trump administration. It advances a number of important priorities, and it actually spends less than if we just extended Biden-era spending levels for these same agencies. And once we finish this package, we have more work to do. Appropriations are working to finish the remaining bills for fiscal year 2026. One of those is the defense appropriations bill, which is an especially important priority, to ensure that our military has the funding and certainty it needs to maintain and modernize its capabilities, support Americans serving in uniform, and protect our national security. Mr. President, we don't have time to waste, and it will require cooperation to ensure that we can keep making progress as the end of the month approaches. Because I want to be clear that January 30 means January 30. We can't afford another extension. And as soon as we finish, work will begin on the next appropriation cycle, starting with the President's budget request for fiscal year 2027. Mr. President, we've done a lot of good work on appropriations this past year, I should say. And I want to thank our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, and especially Chair Collins, for their hard work throughout the year. This work isn't easy, but it's important, and it's a responsibility we need to take seriously. And I know they all do. So let's get fiscal year 2026 funding done and keep up the progress as we begin the process for fiscal year 2027. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
I recognize the senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask for the calling of the quorum to be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, for 4 months, my Democratic colleagues and I have come to the floor to warn against President Trump's military operations in South and Central America. We've pointed out that his boat strike campaign was strategically incoherent, legally questionable, and ultimately not about narco trafficking at all. We have argued that the administration's shifting legal justifications, refusal to give Congress straight answers, and in particular, the failure of the Department of Defense to provide information to Congress which is required by law. All of these things, together with a massive military buildup, pointed towards something larger than narco trafficking. Indeed, we warned that these actions were always directed at the government and economy of Venezuela. That campaign has now culminated in a military raid on Caracas, the capture of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and President Trump's extraordinary declaration that the United States will run Venezuela and seize control of its oil reserves. Let me be very clear about something at the outset. Nicolas Maduro is a brutal dictator who has destroyed Venezuela's economy, crushed democratic opposition, and fostered widespread corruption. He will not be missed. But this operation was not designed to restore peace in Venezuela or protect America from the ravages of drugs. Indeed, Mr. President, this operation is not about democracy. It is not about the suffering of the Venezuelan people. It is not even about narco trafficking, despite the administration's killing more than 100 people in its strikes on alleged drug boats. In the president's own words, this campaign is simply about seizing Venezuela's oil and profiting from it. The people of Venezuela have suffered extraordinary hardship under the Maduro regime. They have voted in multiple elections for new leadership and have been denied their choice through fraud and repression. After everything they have endured, the people of Venezuela deserve to choose what happens next in their country. They do not deserve to have their future dictated by President Trump, Secretary Rubio, or anyone else in Washington. Yet, that is precisely what this administration plans to do. The plan presented by the White House is to simply force the remnants of the Maduro regime to grant the United States exclusive access to Venezuelan oil or face the consequences of a blockade. That's it. That's the plan. Not in the plan, positive change for the people of Venezuela. There is no framework for elections or democratic transition. No serious assessment of the rival political factions inside Venezuela. Factions that have been waiting for precisely this moment to seize power. And I've seen no contingency plan for what happens when China, Russia, Iran, or Cuba, nations with deep economic interests in Venezuela, decide to block or back proxy groups in a country we have just destabilized. Nor have I heard any proposal for the next steps for countering narco trafficking. The administration's goals are aspirational at best, and aspirations are not enough when the stakes involve war and the future of millions of people. Mr. President, one of the first lessons I learned as an Army officer is that hope is not a plan. Over my career, both in uniform and in the Congress, I have seen the United States hope that its military interventions abroad would succeed. I have seen regime changes, nation-building efforts, and elaborate reconstruction schemes launched with confident predictions of success, only to collapse when encountered with the reality reality on the ground. And the reality is this. When we rely on the United States military as a primary tool of foreign engagement, we generally set ourselves up for failure. We have persistently misunderstood and misjudged the cultures, histories, and politics of the nations in which we have intervened, because we assume military might is enough. We imagine outcomes that align with our military and economic objectives, but are surprised when those outcomes fail. We consistently fail to plan for the day after. Unless the Trump administration gets serious, Venezuela will be no exception. This isn't about our military capabilities. We have the most formidable fighting force the world has ever seen. And I am proud and frankly not surprised that all elements of our military work together to successfully execute such a dangerous and difficult mission in Caracas. The skill, professionalism, and courage are beyond question of these men and women. But military capability is not the same as strategic wisdom. The ability to achieve tactical objectives does not guarantee beneficial long-term outcomes. And executing a successful raid does not constitute a plan for governing a nation of 28 million people. Congress exists to provide oversight and scrutiny of the executive branch, not to cheer from the sidelines. I commend our servicemen for their performance last weekend, but I am deeply concerned by the Trump administration's lack of serious planning for the next phase. That is why this war powers resolution is necessary. The Constitution vests the power to authorize war in Congress, not the president. President Trump has claimed this was just a law enforcement mission, and that's absurd. No matter how he describes it, the president waged war on a foreign nation without authorization, without notification to Congress, and without any explanation to the American people about what this operation will cost or what success will look like. This is a profound constitutional failure, and it must be corrected. Mr. President, I hope I'm wrong about these dangers ahead. I hope this administration is right and the transition in Venezuela proceeds smoothly. I hope the Venezuelan people embrace this outcome and see their lives improve quickly. I hope that violent factions in Venezuela choose peace over conflict. I hope the economic recovery for the people of Venezuela justifies this enormous gamble. But as I said before, hope is not enough. And history suggests we should prepare for a far more difficult reality. The question before us is whether Congress will fulfill its constitutional duty or whether we will abdicate our responsibility and allow this president to commit American military resources, credibility, and potentially American lives to an open-ended entanglement without authorization or accountability. And I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from California.
Mr. President, for months, the Trump administration claimed that its campaign of blowing up boats in the Caribbean was about stopping drugs like deadly fentanyl coming to the United States. Never mind that fentanyl doesn't really come from Venezuela. It comes from precursors made in China and is predominantly smuggled in through Mexico. Never mind that there are well-established, well-practiced operations for interdicting drugs and apprehending alleged drug traffickers, not killing them. Never mind that we don't even have clarity on what was on these boats or who was on these boats and where they were headed. No, even as the U.S. military amassed unprecedented military firepower off the coast of Caracas that included multiple warships, thousands of troops, and the largest aircraft carrier ever put to sea, the administration still claimed this was about drug boats. You heard the administration say that time and time again to the public and to Congress. Until last weekend, when the objective became clear. This was about Venezuela's oil, and if we could have that, we would leave the drug-running regime in place, albeit with its number 2 corrupt leader instead of its number 1, Nicolas Maduro. The rightful leadership of Venezuela, Maria Corina Machado and her election surrogate Edmundo Gonzalez, the ones who won the last election there, would have no place, no role in the new government, because this was no more about democracy than it was about drugs. It was about oil. Just yesterday, the Secretary of Energy said that the United States intended to maintain significant control over Venezuela's oil industry, including by overseeing the sale of the country's production indefinitely. Indefinitely. And Donald Trump has promised to use the revenue from these oil sales to create a fund that he would control. He's literally meeting with oil executives on Friday to try to divide up the spoils of this military campaign. Now, some of my colleagues may believe that using the U.S. military to depose Nicolas Maduro and seize Venezuela's oil is well worth the risk to our troops and the danger of becoming mired down in that country. I disagree, but if that was the case, let them seek an authorization from Congress to do so. We have so many urgent problems that need addressing here at home. With life barely affordable for millions of Americans and the cost of living rising, with people struggling to cover the rent, with families barely able to afford the cost of groceries, to say nothing of the skyrocketing healthcare costs. But now, instead of putting Americans first, we are stepping into a foreign nation and promising to run it for the foreseeable future. An administration that had promised to end foreign wars has begun a new one. A president who had decried the use of force for regime change or to engage in nation building has just committed our country to both. No doubt Russia and China see opportunity in this American about-face. Russia to indict Ukrainian leaders and to seize them, and China to do the same in Taiwan. We are not only at risk of reestablishing the idea that might makes right and military conquest is acceptable in your sphere of influence, but the very real prospect of destabilizing a world order post-World War II that has made us safer and more prosperous. Now, when it comes to Congress's role in checking this president, in asserting its war powers given to us by our founders and the framers of our Constitution, if we do not assert this power, we will lose it, and not just to constrain this president, but any president, and for all time. The American people have said clearly and repeatedly they do not want us dragged into new foreign wars, especially wars of our own making. And we have the power to make good on that instruction. We are a co-equal branch of government and the only branch endowed with the power of the purse and the power to declare war or to refuse to do so. But if we do not assert these powers, if we don't stand up not just for our branch of government, but for the American people, there is no telling and no stopping what comes next. Because the administration has made it clear that Venezuela is the opening salvo. Will it be Cuba next, or Colombia, or Mexico, or Greenland, for crying out loud? This is the moment where we need to stand up and exercise our powers as part of the government that is closest to the people, to make it clear that no president can commit our military forces absent an attack on our country or imminent threat of invasion without the approval of Congress, and certainly not to help industry chase new profits or revenue in oil or minerals around the globe. We have a duty to our constituents, to our Constitution, and to posterity. Let us uphold it. Vote yes on the resolution, and with that, Mr. President, I yield back.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
recognize the senator from Idaho.
Close. Are we in a quorum call? We are in a quorum call. Ask quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, fellow senators, we're about to vote on a war powers resolution, which is becoming common around here and way too common, as a matter of fact. But I think the first thing we ought to talk about is what we're actually doing here from a 30,000-foot standpoint as far as what the resolution actually says. As usual, there's a lot of setup in here, but there's 2.5 lines that says what we're trying to do here. Not we, what the other side is trying to do here. And it says, Congress hereby directs the President to terminate the use of the United States Armed Forces for hostilities within or against Venezuela. Let me say that again. We're directing the President to terminate the use of armed forces for hostilities within or against Venezuela. There isn't anybody that has any information that the President is using armed forces against Venezuela. He did for about 47 minutes this last weekend, but he is not in the process of doing this. And the resolution says that he should stop it. He's not doing it. Now, if the resolution were drawn to say, President, you can't do this anymore, that would actually have some effect, or attempt to have some effect. It would be unconstitutional, unenforceable, but to tell him to not do something or to stop doing something he's not doing is nonsense. The effect of this is to slap the President of the United States in the face. That is the only effect that this vote can have. It can have no practical effect because it's trying to stop something that isn't going on. So, we are again here considering this War Powers Resolution to remove the troops from a foreign country where they do not exist. The War Powers Act was created as a way to address the continuing deployment of U.S. forces into hostilities or in hostilities. There is no continuing deployment of U.S. forces in hostilities. The War Powers Act was never designed to remove the President's Article II right to defend the United States, its interests, or its citizens. And nor indeed could the War Powers Act do that, because the Constitution absolutely directs the President of the United States to use the military might of the United States to protect it. Indeed, the constitutional power is given to the President. We cannot change that. It is the power that he has. This vote and similar votes before it are an abuse of the War Powers Act. There are no U.S. military forces in Venezuela. The United States conducted a limited operation that removed an indicted narco-terrorist, Nicolas Maduro, from Venezuela and brought him to the United States to face justice for his crimes. Now, was this a good thing to do? Well, of course it was a good thing to do, and indeed, Democrats themselves have said that it was a good thing to do. I want to read from 3 different Democrats who've told us that this was a good thing to do. I'm not going to name them. They can step up and take credit if they want to. But these are 3 different Democrats. The first one said, obviously, we know Maduro and his cronies do not want to go quietly into the night, but the United States needs to work with its partners and allies in the region to ratchet up pressure. This was a senator on August 2nd, 2024. The same senator said, after Maduro was removed, it is an illegal act of war to replace Maduro. Another senator said, and this was back in 2019, if Trump cared about consistency, he would make the realest case for intervention in Venezuela. Getting rid of Maduro is good for the United States. This senator called for intervention in Venezuela. You know what he says now, after the invasion? The invasion of Venezuela was nothing to do with American security. Venezuela is not a security threat to the U.S. That's what he says today. Now, one of my favorites, this senator said, and this was on February 5th, 2020, and the President brags about his Venezuela policy. Give us a break. He hasn't brought an end to the Maduro regime. The Maduro regime is more powerful today and more entrenched today than it was when the president began. Well, the president changed that. He removed Maduro. You know what that same senator says today? This is reckless. And the American people are just this morning in fear of what's going to happen here. That was January 4th, 2026. This is the height of hypocrisy. The purpose of this resolution is to slap the president in the face. It will do nothing that it purports to do because it can't stop something that isn't going on right now. In addition, the president's actions in Venezuela are consistent with other presidents' efforts to protect the American people from threats in our own backyard. President George H.W. Bush authorized limited military operations to arrest Panama's Manuel Noriega and bring him to the United States to stand trial for drug-related charges, just as President Trump's done with Maduro. In that case, President Bush deployed more than 9,000 troops, and they fought for 2 weeks on the ground in Panama before they got their hands on Noriega. At that time, both Republican and Democrat leaders of the Senate praised this move. Compare that to what happened here. There were only about 200 troops involved, and they were engaged for 47 minutes. And yet, all of a sudden, this is a horrendous problem. Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate that. When you're in the business of flooding drugs into the United States, drugs that kill our children and hurt our country and destabilize our hemisphere in violation of U.S. law, and when you invite in Russia, China, and Iran to set up shop right in our backyard and do the things that they're doing, there's going to be a price to pay. Maduro is paying that price today. But unlike the former president, President Trump demonstrated he is a man of action. He was decisive and did what he promised the American people he would do, and that is to keep them safe. Now Democrats are reversing their position on Maduro's removal to criticize the president. The president's decision was the right call. Let's acknowledge that fact. Let's celebrate that fact. Let's resolve that the president of the United States is to be commended for what he did. My fellow senators, vote no on this resolution. This is nothing more than a slap in the face of the President of the United States. It cannot accomplish something that does not exist. I yield the floor.
I recognize the Democrat leader.
Mr. President, first I want to thank Senators Kaine for his great leadership on this issue, Senator Schiff, Senator Paul for working with me on this resolution. If there was ever a moment for the Senate to find its voice, it is now. The Senate must act to stop Donald Trump's folly. Today, the Senate must assert the authority given to it in the Constitution on matters of war and peace. And we must send Donald Trump a clear message on behalf of the American people: no more endless wars. If any of my colleagues, if any of the American people doubted what Trump was up to, here's what he said last night to the New York Times. They asked him, how long are we going to stay in Venezuela? A month, 6 months, a year? Donald Trump said, quote, I would say much longer. Donald Trump's ready for an endless war in Venezuela and Lord knows where else. The American people are not. The American people want us to focus on the number one issue they face: the rising costs, that they can't afford the things they need, the affordability crisis. And instead, Donald Trump and too many of our Republican colleagues are saying, let us spend our treasure and maybe even American lives on Venezuela and other areas far afield. How can the American people watch this and not just groan and grimace and ache and fear? When we try to do this kind of nation, when America has tried to do this kind of nation building, this kinds of regime replacement in the past, it's led to the American people paying the price in treasure and in blood. So now we have the opportunity to stop. We're very close. We urge our Republican colleagues to join us. Tell the American people you want to focus on what they care about. The cost of groceries, the cost of health care, the cost of electricity and other goods. The contrast between what's happening in the House and the Senate today is glaring. In the House, there will be, from what I am told, a good number of Republicans who will join in saying, extend the tax credits for 3 years. Leader Thune has even refused to put that on the floor. But what's happening here, the ability, the strength, the constitutional authority of the Congress to say no, no endless wars, no sending all our money down to Venezuela and Lord knows what other countries. Again, just look at this, my Republican colleagues. A year longer, I would say not. Here's what Trump said on oversight of Venezuela. He said it could last for years. They asked him a year longer. He says, I would say much longer. How many of you want to see us bogged down in Venezuela for a whole bunch of years? If you don't want to see that, if you want to see us focused on the costs the American people are facing and reduce them, vote with us, vote yes on this very important resolution. I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I've spoken before, so I'm going to be very brief, and then I'm going to call up the business of the Senate, this War Powers resolution. 2 points. In the aftermath of the briefing yesterday, I've had good conversations with colleagues, and many have asked me about the distinction between the execution of a valid arrest warrant and a larger military operation. And I want to state very clearly that I do not challenge, nor does this resolution challenge, the execution of a valid arrest warrant against Nicolas Maduro. That valid arrest warrant, bringing him to justice in the United States, will be good for America and good for Venezuela. And we do not challenge that. And in fact, under the War Powers resolution, I'm not even sure that the execution of an arrest warrant, even if accompanied by a military escort, would rise to the level of hostilities that would allow such a challenge, and I certainly wouldn't be calling it up for a vote on the floor. But this is obviously bigger than the initiation of an arrest warrant. From the beginning on September 2nd, the striking of Venezuelan boats in open waters, the amassing of naval assets around Venezuela, the president's authorization of covert activities, the seizure of ships, the coordinated attack of the 150 aircraft that not only extracted President Maduro and his wife, but also bombed sites around the countries. This is bigger than an arrest warrant. More than 200 enemies have been killed. U.S. troops have been injured. 2 are still hospitalized. And now we understand, after the hearing yesterday and what's been made public, this will go on for a long period of time. The seizure of oil, the dictation of terms about elections and the politics of Venezuela will go on for years. This is not an attack on the arrest warrant, but it is merely a statement that going forward, U.S. troops should not be used in hostilities in Venezuela without a vote of Congress, as the Constitution requires. The second point I'll make, Mr. President, is this. We're all humans in this place, and one of the things we try to do is minimize votes that we might regret. And it's impossible to eliminate those. We're humans, and we cast thousands of votes, even in a single term in the Senate, and there will be some we might look back on and feel like, oh, maybe we should have done this differently. The most likely vote where regret would be most painful is a vote on matters of war. And I just want to assure my colleagues, here is something I can guarantee you. No one has ever regretted a vote that just says, Mr. President, before you send our sons and daughters to war, come to Congress. That is a vote that no one has ever regretted and no one will ever regret. And with that, Mr. President, pursuant to Section 601B of the International Security Assistance and Arms Control Act of 1976, I move to discharge the Committee on Foreign Relations from further consideration of SJ Res 98, to direct the removal of the United States Armed Forces from hostilities within or against Venezuela that have not been authorized by Congress.
The clerk will report.
Motion to discharge SJ Res 98. Joint resolution to direct the removal of United States Armed Forces from hostilities within or against Venezuela that have not been authorized by Congress.
Questions on the motion to discharge? Is there a sufficient second? Appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks.
No.
Gotcha. Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Mr. Kennedy, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Welch. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Baldwin, Bennett, Durbin, Kane, Ossoff, Reed, Schiff, Schumer, Shaheen, and Young. Senators voting in the negative: Barrasso, Capito, Graham, Johnson, Lankford, Marshall, Moran, Marino, Risch, Scott of Florida, Sheehy, Tillis, and Wicker. Ms. Smith, aye. Mr. Curtis, no. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Haggerty, no. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Kennedy, no. Mrs. Britt, no. Ms. Lummis, no. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Peters, aye. Mr. Mullen, no.
Ms. Murkowski, aye. Ms. Hassan, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. McCormick, no. Mr. Hoven, no. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mrs. Hyde Smith, no. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Welch, aye. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Mr. Lujan, aye. Mr. Padilla, aye. Mrs. Moody, Mrs. Moody, no. Miss Rosen, aye. Mr. Cassidy, no. Mr. Thune, no. Miss Hirono, aye. Miss Collins, aye. Mr. Cornyn, no. Miss Duckworth, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Miss Ernst, no. Mr. Booker, aye. Mr. Markey, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester, aye. Ms. Warren, aye. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Tuberville, no. Mr. Justice, no. Mr. Cotton, no. Mrs. Blackburn, no. Mr. Banks, no. Mr. Husted, no. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Ricketts, no. Mr. Schmidt, no. Mr. McConnell, no. Ms. Slotkin, aye. Mr. Coons, aye. Ms. Alsobrooks, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Gallego, aye. Mr. Sullivan, no. Mr. Kim, aye. Mr. Rounds, no. Mr. Budd, no. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Mr. King, aye. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mr. Schatz, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mrs. Fisher, no. Mr. Kramer, no. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye.
The yeas are 52. The nays are 47. The motion is agreed to. The joint resolution will be placed on the calendar. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the judiciary. Alexander C. Van Hook of Louisiana to be United States District Judge for the Western District of Louisiana.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, could we have order in the chamber, please?
Senate will come to order.
I'm looking for my glasses, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, with me today is Mr. Nick Ayers, a colleague from my office. Nick, would you go in the room in there and see if my glasses fell out of my jacket? Would you? Nick, the President just helped me out here. Thank you, Mr. President. How's my hair? Is it okay? Okay, I understand. You can only do so much. I want to talk about a serious subject, Mr. President. I want to talk about welfare fraud, taxpayer money. Now, I want to make it clear that I love Minnesota. I love Minnesota. But I do not like people, whether they live in Minnesota or elsewhere, who steal money from the poor. There ought to be a special place in hell for them. By now, unless you are still living in your parents' basement playing video games, you know that there has been massive welfare fraud in Minnesota. It's staggering, it's stunning, it's astounding. It may rise to the level of $9 billion of taxpayer money meant for the poor. $9 billion. Now, it's an uncomfortable truth that at this juncture, most of that fraud appears to be centered in the community of Minneapolis among people of Somali ancestry. Some have said and suggested that it's racist to say that. Facts are not racist. What I just said is just a fact. So far, there have been 90 people charged, most of whom are of Somali descent. That's just a fact. There are over 100,000 people of Somali ancestry in Minnesota, most of them in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And the vast majority of them vote in a bloc, as is their right. And a vast majority of them vote in a bloc for Democratic candidates, as is their right. Some will say Kennedy's being a racist for pointing that out. Let me say it again. Facts are not racist. They're facts. It's already come out at some of the trials. And not all of the folks being charged are of Somali ancestry. I want to make that very clear. But most of them are. Again, just a fact. I apologize for my voice. Now, let me explain what this thievery, this industrial scale fraud was all about. It was centered around Medicaid. And as you know, Mr. President, Medicaid is a federal program administered by the states. We put up most of the money to provide health care, health coverage for poor people, for pregnant women, for children, and for disabled people. Now, President Obama, through Obamacare, extended Medicaid to some folks in the middle class, but still the main purpose of Medicaid is to help poor folks and disabled folks. Because in America, we help our friends. You know, I was looking at a number the other day. In the last 50 years, the American economy has grown 142% in the last 50 years. The American economy has grown 142% in the last 50 years. Pretty extraordinary number. Welfare spending in America has grown 765%. So I get a little upset when some people say, well, you know, the American people are selfish. We spend over $1 trillion a year helping our neighbors who are less fortunate than us, mostly the poor. In our country, I've said this before, if you're hungry, we'll feed you. If you're homeless, we'll house you. If you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. Other countries let their fellow citizens die in a ditch. We don't do that in America. The American people have stepped up to the plate. So when people steal this money, this $1 trillion plus a year that we spend helping our neighbors, when people steal that money, it offends me. When they steal from the poor and they steal from the American taxpayer. It offends me equally. And the folks in Minnesota and elsewhere who stole this money, who took a giant Great Dane whiz down the leg of every taxpayer and poor person in America, every one of them ought to go to jail. There were it looks like so far there are 4 programs. Medicaid, and let me just say, the federal government puts up most of the money for Medicaid, not all of it. In some cases, the federal government puts up as little as 50%. In some cases, 90% of the money being spent on Medicaid comes from federal taxpayers. We design the rules at the federal level. We put up most of the money, but the states are supposed to implement the program, and they're supposed to combat fraud, and many of them don't. The GAO says that about of that $1 trillion I talked about that the American people spend on welfare, as much as $250 million, $250 billion, maybe more, 250 billion or more, is stolen. And it's got to stop. And I'm going to talk about a solution in a moment. But let me tell you what was happening in Minnesota. One of the things Medicaid does, along with the food stamp program, is to feed people, particularly children. So what these thieves in Minnesota were doing, they were setting up these fictitious corporations and applying to Governor Tim Walz's Medicaid office for money to distribute to the poor. And Governor Tim Walz's welfare office would give them hundreds of millions of dollars. And of course, the thieves running these fictitious corporations sucked it up like a Hoover Deluxe. And then these fictitious corporations would go to restaurants in the community, many of them in the Somali community, and say, here's the deal. I want you to fill out a report saying you fed all these poor people. Of course, you're not feeding anybody. Just lie. And give me the report. And I'll give you a percentage of the money that I'm stealing from the American taxpayer and the people of Minnesota. And that's what they did. But they didn't just limit it to food. It was industrial scale fraud. Next, they moved to health care. They formed, some formed fictitious corporations, companies, saying we're going to deliver I said health care, I meant child care to poor people, homeless people. And so the fictitious company run by these thieves would go to Governor Walz's agencies and say, give us a bunch of money, we're going to house homeless people. And Governor Walz would give them the money, and the thieves sucked it up like a Hoover Deluxe. And then they went to a bunch of other of folks in the community and said, henceforth, you're in the housing business, and you need to fill out a report, it's a lie, fill out a report saying you're providing housing for a bunch of people. Of course they weren't. And then we, the thieves who got the money from Governor Walz, will kick you back a little bit of the money. Did they stop there? No. Then they moved into, I just described housing, they moved into child care. Under Medicaid, you can use money to provide child care. So the thieves formed a bunch of new fictitious companies and went to Governor Walz and his agencies and said, give us a bunch of welfare money, Medicaid money, give folks who are poor child care. And then the thieves running the fictitious company went to families, many of them in the Somali community, and said, do you have a child who's autistic? If so, we want to sign them up. But if some of the families said, no, we don't have a child who's autistic, the thieves said, don't worry about it. Lie. Tell us you have a child who's autistic. And whether your child is autistic or not, we're not going to provide any services for your children, but we will kick you back some of the money. It's disgusting. So it was in child care, housing, autism, food. $9 billion and climbing. Now, Governor Walz, in fact, I probably shouldn't repeat this, but I read something on the internet the other day. Somebody made an observation. They said, and I don't want to paint with too broad a brush because there's some fine child care services in Minnesota as there are elsewhere, but the person on social media asked a question: How do you know if you've discovered one of these fictitious child care services? Well, you go there and no one's inside, but the owner pulls up in a Lamborghini, and that's what happened. The people who were stealing the money directly from Governor Walz and then giving it to the folks that were helping them, the fictitious restaurants, or the restaurants creating fictitious lists of people they fed, autistic children they were helping who weren't autistic. They took the money too, and all of them had a big old party. They bought cars, they bought jewelry, they took expensive vacations, they sent money back to Somalia. There is an investigation going on right now, I'm not saying it's true, that some of the money might have gone to terrorist organizations in Somalia. American taxpayer money that these people were taking out of the mouths of poor people. Now, Governor Walz says, I knew nothing about this, man. It's news to me. And he said, in fact, I'm taking some bold steps. He said, at first, I'm not going to run for a third term. I guess he needs more time. Hope he uses the time to prepare his defense, because he's got a lot to defend here. He knew what was going on. In fact, one of the lawyers representing one of the thieves in this case said many of the people, this was their excuse, said many of the people involved in the stealing thought that the state was okay with it. That's what he said. Here's his quote: no one was doing anything about the red flags. Red flags were everywhere. Nobody in state government, he said, was doing anything about the red flags. It was like someone was stealing money from the cookie jar and they kept refilling it. The state knew. And at one point, Governor Walz and some of his agencies said, whoa, maybe we ought to put a stop to this. And they backed off. They said, no more money for a while. Well, fresh hell broke loose. You know what happened? the largest, most powerful, fictitious company, run mostly by people of Somali ancestry, sent an email to the Minnesota state government. And they said that the state agency that was failing to promptly approve new applications and give us new money from, quote, minority-owned businesses, close quote, it was going to result in a lawsuit featuring accusations of racism that would be sprawled across the news. If you don't give us our money, we're going to call you racist. They did it. It's all come out in evidence at trial. In fact, a lady by the name of Kesa Megan, she's one of the good guys. She is a Somali American who used to work as a fraud investigator in the Attorney General's office, who, by the way, was just as involved as Governor Walz in turning a blind eye to all this. She says, and she said it in the newspaper, she said that elected officials, and particularly those who are part of the state's Democratic-led administration, were reluctant to take more assertive action in response to the allegations. Why? Here's her quote. There is a perception that forcefully tackling this issue might cause political backlash from the Somali community, which is a core voting bloc for Democrats. And she is among the few among many prominent figures in the Somali community who is speaking out against the fraud. In fact, at one point, a bunch of state employees, I don't remember how many, but they posted a letter publicly on social media saying Governor Walz knew about, and the Attorney General knew about this all the time. And we told them. We warned them early on. And you know what they did? They just stood there sucking on their teeth. They did nothing. And so you know what the state employees did? They went to the U.S. attorney. They went to the U.S. attorney. And the U.S. attorney jumped all over this and said this is obvious fraud. And that's how all this got started. Now, what do we do about it? Well, first, I don't think that the only place this is happening is Minnesota. And certainly there are people involved in welfare fraud besides the few Somali Americans in Minnesota. And I mentioned the Somali Americans because it's just a fact. It's a fact in the trial of these disputes, the politics of it and everything else in the litigation. I think it's happening in various degrees all over America. Let me say it again. We're spending $1 trillion a year of American taxpayer money to help poor people, provide welfare, and GAO estimates that about at least $250 billion is being stolen every year. We took some baby steps in the One Big Beautiful Bill, as you know, Mr. President. We tightened up eligibility requirements. We're requiring states to check twice a year to make sure people don't lie when they sign up for Medicaid or for food stamps or for housing assistance. We've implemented a work requirement, but we need to do more. We need to do more, and that's why we need to do another reconciliation bill. Now, I hope I'm wrong when I say this. I hope I'm wrong. I invite my Democratic colleagues in the Senate, I love them all, to come forward and help us. But I just know politics, and you do too, Mr. President. A lot of them are going to be reluctant. But we don't need their assistance. We can pass a welfare security bill with all Democratic votes. If I could do it on my own, I would introduce the bill tomorrow. I would go and look at every single state and every single country and look for the best practices on presenting welfare fraud. I would cross-record or cross-access a list of people who sign up for welfare to their tax records, if they have any. Sometimes people lie. In Louisiana, we've caught people making $250,000 a year getting Medicaid. But you got to check. Apparently nobody was checking in Minnesota, and I don't think they're on. If you're up to me, I'm drafting that bill now. I look at every state, every country, and adopt the best practices. And my bill can be ready in 2 weeks. But I can't do a thing about it getting it passed, because I don't have the authority to bring it to the floor of the Senate. I don't. Only the majority leader can agree to bring a bill to be considered by the Senate. Those are the rules. If I were king for a day, I'd change it in a nanosecond. I think every senator ought to be able to bring his bills to the floor. And that's not a criticism of my good friend John Thune or my good friend Mitch McConnell or my friend Chuck Schumer. They're just following the rules. I'd change it. But we need to do another reconciliation bill. We can to fix the welfare system and stop the stealing. Stop the stealing. And we can do it with all Republican votes. So please, Senator Thune, pretty please, as I've said before, I'm shameless, I'll beg. I'll get down on my knees. John, please bring another reconciliation bill. We can do so much, but we can start with fixing welfare fraud. Please, John, please let us do the bill. I don't want to end on a negative note. I might have hurt my back going down, Mr. President. I don't want to end on a negative note. I love this country. I just think America's the greatest country in all of human history. I do. And the whole world knows it. Everybody wants to come here. When's the last time you heard of somebody trying to sneak into China? No, they want to come to America. And I believe, as much as I'm standing here, that the future of this country can be better than the present or our past. It can be. I've always believed that we're only as good as our dreams, Mr. President. We're only as valuable as our children. But I'm not going to bubble wrap it. We got $30+ trillion worth of debt. And we got people stealing from poor people and laughing about it. And politicians participating in it. And the water's not, and Washington's got to do its role, its part to fix this. But the water's not going to clear up for America. The water's not going to clear up for America until we get the pigs out of the creek. Let's go get the pigs out of the creek. Please, Senator Thune, please let us do another reconciliation bill. Please lead with welfare reform. We can do it. You can do it. I know you can. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be initiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Republicans ran this past election year to make America safer and more prosperous. And now we're a year into this, and people are seeing the comprehensive economic plan that the Republicans have put into place is working for them. This year, going forward, Americans are going to see even more money in their pockets, and that's thanks to the Working Families Tax Cuts law. The average American taxpayers will see a significant cut this year in their taxes, which is a direct effect of the law. Families in every single state in the nation are feeling relief. Now, key parts of this tax law went into effect just on January 1st, and they're going to make life much more affordable for American families. Republicans increased the child tax credit to $2,200 per child, and they made it permanent. And it's per child every year. That means a couple in Cody, Wyoming with 2 children, $4,400 a year. That's money to help buy groceries, help with education, helps with that child's activities. Republicans also raised the limit on dependent care flexible spending accounts, raised it to $7,500 from $5,000. So a working mother in Casper, Wyoming can now set aside $7,500 pre-tax for child care. Senator Katie Britt of Alabama championed that, really pushed it through, worked very hard. Additionally, Republicans are doing things Congress has never done before. We have now created a guaranteed savings account for every American child. Every child born between 2025 and 2028 will receive a $1,000 investment account. So a child born in Sheridan, Wyoming will now start life with $1,000 already invested in their future. Senator Ted Cruz had this innovative idea. Additionally, the Working Family Tax Cuts law protects family farms, ranchers, small business owners. This is vital in my home state of Wyoming and for other rural states. For years, farmers and ranchers told me the same thing. The death tax makes it nearly impossible to pass their family operations on to the next generation. Republicans delivered permanent death tax relief for family farmers, for ranchers, and for small business owners. Now ranchers in Wheatland, Wyoming, or Worland, or Torrington, Gillette, they can now pass their land on and their livelihood to that next generation and avoid these crushing death taxes from Washington, D.C. Every Democrat in the Senate voted against the bill, every single one of them. They want the government to come in and confiscate small businesses and farms and ranches. That's not what Republicans stand for, and that's not what we did. Democrats had their way. Taxes would be going up this year by $4 trillion. Democrats support and probably continue to support the largest tax increase in American history because that's the way they voted. When Republicans proposed legislation to crack down on waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption in Medicaid and food stamps and government social programs, every Democrat in the Senate voted no. They must love the corruption. Which brings us to Minnesota. Yesterday, Congress exposed worrying new information about the vast extent of the massive fraud and corruption in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who was the Democrat vice presidential nominee in 2024, and his Attorney General Keith Ellison, who was the deputy chair of the Democrat National Committee, they are presiding over one of the most outrageous fraud scandals in recent memory. Manipulative criminals have stolen billions of dollars from federal programs, billions meant to help vulnerable Americans. Republicans voted to put more money in people's pockets. That's not what the Democrats wanted. No, they voted to raise taxes and voted to protect the kind of fraud being exposed in Minnesota today. The kind of fraud that Democrat elected officials refused to see and refused to stop. The working family tax cuts are part of a broader economic agenda that is already working, and the numbers prove it. Today, the world's most successful companies are investing in this country, $10 trillion in America. Record investment is driving private sector job growth. It's driving innovation. It's driving opportunity. The proof is that the economy grew 4.3% in the third quarter. That's the strongest economic growth in 2 years. Core inflation cooled in November to 2.6%. Gasoline is now less than $3 per gallon in most of the country. In Casper, Wyoming, Monday morning it was $1.91. Forecasters predict prices are going to continue to fall. Real wages are on track to grow by over $1,000 this year. All of these successes happened because Republicans are committed to American prosperity. We cut taxes, we eliminated wasteful Washington spending, we rolled back burdensome regulations, we unleashed American energy. This is a 180-degree turnaround from the past 4 years under Joe Biden and the Democrats. Under Joe Biden and the Democrats, prices rose by over 20% in 4 years. The Democrats will now go down in history as the party of high prices, high taxes, and open borders. As Americans celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation, we can be confident that our country is safer, is stronger, and more prosperous. And with the working families tax cuts, Republicans are making sure that that prosperity continues, Mr. President, into the future. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Yes. The senator from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, here's a fact that Donald Trump seems to not understand or care about. Families in Nevada and all across this country are being squeezed by high costs. Nevadans are struggling to afford even the most basic things, from groceries to rent to health care. This isn't just in Nevada. All across the country, housing costs are up, healthcare costs are up. Even the most basic, unavoidable expenses like electricity have even gotten more expensive. But if you ask Donald Trump, he says affordability, and I'm going to quote here, is a hoax. It's a con job by the Democrats. He even said, and I'm going to quote again, prices are coming down tremendously. Inflation has stopped, end quote. Well, I'm going to ask everybody here at home today, do you think affordability is a hoax? Do you feel like prices are going down? So don't listen to Trump. Just take one look at your grocery bill this week. It's clear he isn't paying attention to hard-working people because the price of your groceries has done nothing but skyrocket. And Donald Trump, well, he ran for president on lowering prices. Since he got into office nearly a year ago, Americans have spent, on average, well over